This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on Niti Aayog Governing Council meeting and its significance. The participants are Ashok Tandon, political analyst, and Aditi Tandon, journalist.
The Niti Aayog Governing Council was held in the morning, and as we know that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is the chairman of Niti Aayog, he made the opening comments and also the closing comments. This was a very important meeting, Ashokji, because it was the first physical meeting of the council since the onset of the pandemic, and as we all know that the last meeting was held in virtual mode. As many as 23 chief ministers, 3 lieutenant governors, and 2 administrators among union ministers attended this meeting. 6 months had gone into the agenda setting for the meeting, and the final items that eventually emerged for debates and discussions today included crop diversification, self-sufficiency in edible products, including oilseeds and other agri-commodities, the implementation of national education policy, and also urban governance. Ashokji, this was a very important meeting for various reasons. It has come at a time when India is marking the Amrit Kal. We are going to complete 75th year of independence. In that larger context, how do you see the meeting, considering Prime Minister said that everybody, all chief ministers should work as Team India?
See, when Mr. Modi came to power in 2014, he scrapped the Planning Commission. And instead, the central government formed a think tank, and the name given was Niti Aayog. And today, the Governing Council, which is the apex body of the Niti Aayog, as you very rightly said, had its 7th meeting. It's basically an annual affair, but due to Corona, physical meetings could not be held. So it was the first meeting, physical meeting after the COVID-19. And as you also very correctly mentioned, the participation was at the highest level. And except the Telangana Chief Minister, who wrote a letter saying that he will not be attending because of allegation he made was that the center has been discriminating against Telangana. And very promptly, the Niti Aayog had dismissed these allegations and gave a detailed explanation how Niti Aayog has been cooperating with the state of Telangana in fulfilling all its programs and schemes. So having said that, most of the chief ministers, whether they come from different political background, they were in a very positive and constructive mode today. And the meeting, that is why, was in a very cordial, positive and constructive atmosphere. As you also mentioned in the beginning, the Prime Minister made some opening remark, and he actually began with saying the cooperative federalism which India has demonstrated to the world. The classic example was how India fought COVID-19. And not only we successfully fought COVID-19, but we also, in a very innovative way, launched our own vaccines. And not only that, we exported those vaccines to a large number of countries. That, the Prime Minister said, was a classic example of India being a very collaborative federalism. And in that context, he urge upon the states to look for the opportunities which G20 summit, which India is going to host next year, will be providing to the state governments. And in that context, Mamata Banerjee was in a very positive frame of mind today. She said, yes, of course, we are a cooperative and collaborative federalism, and West Bengal will certainly play a very constructive and positive role. Whatever opportunities come across West Bengal government in India hosting G20 summit. Of course, she did raise some state issues. And the Chief Minister of Odisha, Naveen Patnaik, also raised some issues. And he wanted the Niti Aayog to play the role of an ombudsman when there are issues between the center and the state.
I just wanted to interrupt you, Ashokji, and bring you on this very important issue of crop diversification and self-sufficiency in pulses, oilseeds and agricultural commodities, which was the principal agenda item of today's meeting. You know, what's important is that India is an agriculture-dominated economy, and Prime Minister has for long been urging that crop diversification is very important if we have to reduce our dependence on imports. Right now, after today's meeting, it did emerge that there is 50% dependence on imports as far as edible oils are concerned. And although in pulses pulses, we are almost there in achieving self-sufficiency, except in two pulses, which was Masoor and Arhar. So, on this Atmanirbharta spree that we are actually in, and the Prime Minister again emphasizing vocal for local and complete sufficiency in food items. What is your take on this larger perspective?
The Prime Minister also voiced his concern over, our increased import of pulses and less export, because we do have self-sufficiency in most of the pulses. We even export some of the pulses. But as you very rightly said, two items in pulses, Tur and Arhar, are where we have to depend on import. And he urged upon the state governments to do the needful so that our imports are reduced. In fact, even in the edible oil field also, India needs to reduce its imports, and by increasing the domestic production. So these two issues were discussed in detail, and the states obviously assured the Prime Minister and the Council that they will do the needful, and the India's dependence on import of certain items of pulses and edible oil needs to be reduced drastically. That is how there was a broad consensus on this issue, that much more needs to be done as far as the issue of edible oil and pulses is concerned. And the Prime Minister said that
in fact, in terms of the crop diversification challenge, Ashokji, some states did mention today that if you have to achieve complete independence on this edible oil and pulse front, then you have to revisit the MSP issue with respect to these two items. And there was a positive debate with respect to that. There's a committee also now which has been formed. Bringing you to the National Education Policy, which is a very important document, and many states have begun to implement it in all honesty. The Prime Minister reiterated today that India has to prepare its youth competitive global world, and for which the transition which has been made available and enabled through the National Education Policy document is very critical. How do you see the National Education Policy panning out?
This is one issue on which there was a broad consensus as far as implementation of the National Education Policy is concerned. And state after state, chief minister after chief minister, they took keen interest in ensuring that the national education policy is being implemented. Most of the states, their focus was on higher education. And but Prime Minister requested all the chief ministers personally monitor on monthly basis the progress in implementation of the national education policy, both in higher as well as primary education. PM, in fact, was more concerned about the primary education as far as the national education policy is concerned. And, the education minister, Mr. Dharmendra Pradhan, gave a detailed presentation how different states were very rigorously implementing all aspects of the educational policy, and the presentation was well accepted. And I think this was one area on which there was hardly any contention at all between the chief minister belonging to different states. So that way, national education policy agenda was very fruitfully discussed, and there were very positive results also.
Right. Ashokji, I also was looking at the press conference which was held after the day-long meeting, and which was addressed by Vice Chairman of Niti Aayog, Suman Berry. Of course, he's new, and also the CEO of Niti Aayog is new, and therefore this was their first address after they took charge. He made a very important point along the lines of what the Prime Minister said. Mr. Berry said that India's transformation has to take place in its states. He also reaffirmed the need for combined efforts of the center and states. But we see on a daily basis strange kind of relationship between the center and some opposition ruled states. And although, today the meeting was held in an extremely positive atmosphere, how do you foresee this increasing political tension between the BJP ruled center and the opposition ruled states, primarily the Congress and TRS you already mentioned earlier, for, the larger goals that have been set for national good?
Stage was set for a very cordial and positive meeting by the Prime Minister's opening remarks, where he appreciated the collaborative federalism of India and gave the details how India has been proving to the world that our collaborative federalism is at work. And I think that set the stage. That is why most of the states did not deviate from the agenda. And if we go by the briefing of the Niti Aayog, the spirit was focused on the agenda. The word used was that most of the chief ministers and states were disciplined as far as the agenda is concerned. I think the credit must be given to the Prime Minister because he did appreciate all the points raised by the state government. Their concerns were well addressed, and therefore, at the end of the day, most of the states left the meeting fully satisfied. And if I can quote, if Ms. Mamata Banerjee can be satisfied with the proceedings, of course, there was no politics at all. So I think it was a very positive sign that the states are very sincere and seriously executing the national education policy. They are also serious about crop diversification. They are also serious about other agenda items like GST collection. There was focus on increasing the GST collection, and that way, as PM also mentioned, that at different stages he was intervening, and he said if we have to talk about Vikas, the role of the states is critical. And he all the time was appreciating the states the way they have been conducting all the policies, their state policy, as well as implementing the national policy.
Prime Minister, when he was speaking of the spirit of Team India, he gave, in fact, the entire credit for India's successful COVID response, which is continuing, to the state governments. And he said that it was because of the state governments that ensured last mile delivery of, critical food grains, health services, diagnostics, vaccines, the remotest corner of the country, in mountainous regions, in deserts. So that way, what you said is extremely important, that the stage was set by the Prime Minister right at the beginning.
See, the backdrop of the conference hall, it was said Team India. That itself set the stage. The backdrop of the conference hall was Team India. That is what you also exactly said. But I think another very important issue was urban governance. That was one issue on which most of the states wanted to give their suggestion. And what we understand from the briefing was that the northeastern states were apprehensive because they said that there is heterogeneous growth, because some states with large urban governance and urbanization, Northeast needs to be given some more focus. But Prime Minister, when he intervened, he said, we will have to accept the reality that urbanization has come to stay. But we need to give better governance as far as urbanization is concerned. And that was the focus of most of the states.
You've brought out a very important topic of urban governance, Ashokji, and it's extremely critical in times of, rapid environmental and climatic disasters, which have been aggravated by, climate change challenges. As you know, India did make a pledge of net zero carbon emissions by 2070 at the recent COP26 conference in Glasgow, and Prime Minister articulated the national pledge there. So in that context, I think this stress on urban governance becomes even more challenging. How do you look at the role of states in achieving the transition to green energy?
The one thing which was again very significant was that the Prime Minister gave chance to all the chief ministers to elaborate and give presentation on the best practices in their respective states for other states to get some ideas about that. And then there was presentation by the Commerce Minister, there was a presentation by the External Affairs Minister on the G20 summit, the Shanghai Cooperation Council. India is going to have the chairmanship of that in 2023. And also India is going to play a very significant role in the United Nations as far as the question of what you have said are concerned. So presentation was given by different ministers, and finance minister also gave her views about the GST also. So it was a very comprehensive agenda which was discussed threadbare, and it was a whole day meeting. Not only the Prime Minister, all the chief ministers sat through the entire meeting, and that is something which is significant. A lot was discussed at the Dharamshala meeting of the chief secretaries, which again was presided over the Prime Minister.
Right. I think whatever you said is extremely critical, and that was really the backdrop of today's meeting. And whatever was decided today, as the Prime Minister said, will set the path for national priorities over the next 25 years of Amrit Kal. Chokji, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on Niti Aayog Governing Council meeting and its significance. The participants were Ashok Tandon, political analyst, and Aditi Tandon, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel News on AIR Official. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.